Our gospel lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 1 through 9, and then again 18 through 23. This can be found on pages 13 and 14 in the Second Testament portion of your Pew Bible, if you would like to follow along. Let us together listen for the voice of the Lord. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the lake. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood around on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Here, then, the parable of the sower, he later said to his disciples when they asked for an explanation. "When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. That is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures it only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, the person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit, and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, in another 30. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our reading from the Gospel of Matthew is one of 5 teaching discourses in the Gospel. The first of which is probably familiar to you. It is the Sermon on the Mount. The second is Jesus' charge to his disciples, or the mission discourse. This morning's text is the third, and represents a dramatic shift in style. The first 2 discourses are direct and practical in nature and much more traditional in their approach. But here in Matthew 13, Jesus begins teaching the audience in a different way. Here, Jesus teaches using parables. Now, these short discourses reference common, everyday objects and activities with which those who were gathered to hear would be familiar. Farmers, seed, fields, wheat, bread, coins, pearls, fish. And these teachings were most often offered without explanation, in hopes that those with vision that goes beyond physical sight, those with the ability to imagine the realm of the divine, would come to understand their meaning. Parables are not meant to be allegories, where every detail represents something specific in a 1-to-1 ratio. Rather, they are to point the hearers and the readers towards something bigger than the individual details themselves. And often their meaning is purposefully fluid. Therefore, it is rather curious that in the second half of our text this morning, we hear Jesus explaining this parable to the disciples. Because the explanation of the parable spells out allegorical details. And because of this fact, many New Testament scholars think that this explanation could have actually been added later by those who followed Matthew's teachings, perhaps as much as a generation after the original writing of the gospel. It may have been included in order to offer some kind of an explanation to that community as to why some people didn't receive the message that they were sharing, and in fact were rejecting it altogether. With this detailed explanation of the parable, I confess that it is also easy to go down a complex and worrying rabbit hole, and as a result of it, I can find myself spinning in self-doubt and uncertainty, wondering if, in fact, I was one of the other soils, worrying that maybe I wasn't enough. Am I good enough soil? Is my soul dry and hard and beaten down like the path? Are there rocky places in my life that I must tend to in order to receive the message? And what are the weedy passages in my heart and in my mind that might choke out the good news? I know. I must simply try harder to make myself worthy to receive the good news. That will do the trick. And then this line of thinking can also lead one to judge others, making decisions about who else is worthy to receive this seed scattered by the sower, setting up boundaries and barriers that restrict access to grace, love, justice, mercy, compassion, and liberation. This approach fits so well into our human tendency to categorize everything and everyone, including ourselves. This morning, I would like for us to take a different look at the parable, most commonly called the parable of the sower. Notice first that it is not called the parable of the soil or the parable of the seed. It would make sense that this parable, the parable of the sower, like the parables that surround it, would be designed to tell the hearers of the character and the characteristics of the realm of God, of the wonder of the God movement. So perhaps the point is something different altogether than our attempts at categorization and classification and clarification. Maybe, just maybe, the point is the activity of the sower, not the kind of seed being spread or the type of soil upon which the seeds fall. After all, isn't that the manner in which the parable begins? Listen, a sower, farmer, went out into the field to sow seed. Or behold, look, this is what the kingdom of heaven, the realm of the divine, the God movement is like. It is like a seed scatterer who goes out to scatter seed. And everything seems to begin the way in which one would expect the farm scene to begin. But then it changes. To a traditional farmer concerned with how much seed is used and where it is planted, or even the casual onlooker who is just vaguely familiar with farming, the sower's actions and methodology seem to not make a bit of sense. Their work seems frivolous, careless even. Look at their behavior. The sower takes the seed, the most valuable thing in their possession, in the possession of any farmer, and they scatter it everywhere. Willy-nilly, as my mom would say. And there doesn't seem to be any regard for conditions or location or potential outcomes, success or failure. The seed is simply scattered in a haphazard manner, and the seed, it falls wherever it falls. Some falls upon the path, hardened and beaten down by foot, by weather, by sun. Other seed falls among the rocks where the soil is rugged and shallow. Still other seed is scattered where it takes root among the weeds and fights for sun and rain and nutrition. The sower does not concern themselves with judging the soil upon which the seed falls. They just scatter seed. This is not a good business plan. And neither is it a good practice for any farmer or any good gardener, for that matter. But friends, the parable is not designed to instruct people in good farming techniques or gardening practices. This is not the point. In fact, the reason the parable is told in this manner in the first place may be to capture the attention of the audience with its simple absurdity. It is designed to make the hearer ask questions, important questions, that they may not have asked before. Who is this reckless farmer? Why would they act like this? Why would they be so cavalier with something so valuable? And wait, is the teacher even really talking about farming? Theologian, pastor, and president emeritus of Austin Theological Seminary, Theodore Wardlow, writes of this parable. Ultimately, this parable is not so much about good soil as it is about a good sower. The sower is not so cautious and strategic as to throw the seed in only those places where the chances for growth are best. No, this sower is a high-risk sower, relentless in indiscriminately throwing seed on all soil as if all were potentially good soil. On the rocks, amid the thorns, on well-worn paths. It leads one to wonder if there is any place or circumstance in which God's seed cannot sprout, take root, as if to suggest that God's vision for the world is often apprehended in strange and broken places. It may not be good farming practice, but this is the nature of the kingdom of heaven and the realm of the divine. For in the God movement, for the way of Jesus, grace is indiscriminate. Or it isn't grace at all, it is meritocracy, parading about as equity and equality. Love is for all. Or it is no better than a reward system for good behavior. Justice is for everyone. Or it is nothing more than preferential treatment. Mercy has no limits, or it is only favor for those powerful enough to deserve it. Compassion is for everyone, or it is cruelty masquerading as piety. Liberation is action taken for all, or it is only suppression disguised as freedom. In the parable of the sower, Jesus shows us the true nature of the divine. God's grace, God's love, God's justice, God's mercy, God's compassion, God's liberation are audacious. They are without limits and boundaries. The divine is indiscriminate in sowing seeds, even where, or perhaps I should say, especially where the chances of it bearing any fruit are perhaps minimal at best. But the divine sows anyway. This is all because God's vision for you, for me, for us, for the world, is that there can never be wasted effort when it comes to grace, love, justice, mercy, compassion, and liberation. There will always be unexpected places in which the good news takes root and produces a harvest of 30, 60, or 100-fold that of which had been planted. This is radical abundance. The magnificent multiplication, the limitless realm of the divine, right here, in our midst. Look around you. You know it to be true. Look within. Could there be any more compelling evidence to the wide, wild, exuberant movement of God? So what does this mean for us as individuals, as the church, as people who long to follow the one who told this parable, the very sower of the seed himself? Professor, pastor, and preacher Tom Long writes, "The church is called to waste itself, to throw grace around like there is no tomorrow, precisely because there is a tomorrow and it belongs to God." Friends, as followers of Christ, we are called to scatter the seed and allow it to catch the wind and to take root and grow where it will. It is risky work, full of challenges. But what if we were to sow the seed anyway, to scatter the seed everywhere? Grace is always unbelievable. And the church is called to offer grace anyway. Love seems ridiculous at times. We love anyway. Justice often goes unrealized. We struggle for it anyway. Mercy will often not be returned to the ones who extend it, but mercy is given anyway. Compassion is unrequited. We act compassionately anyway. Liberation is always just out of reach, but we work for liberation for all anyway. The seeds from the sower, they land on our lives, and we are called to spread them in turn, and the multiplier multiplies the harvest. We're not called to hold back. In fact, the church is called to exactly the opposite. In the face of challenges, hardship, rocky passages, and soil beaten down by the feet of those who walk over it, we are called to exuberantly scatter seed anywhere, without limits, and without regard for where it lands. Our call is to scatter the seed. To God be the glory. Amen.